Welcome back to Unsightly Opinions. If you're new, my name's Tamara, and thank you so much for stopping by this little unsightly part of the internet. Today, we're going to talk about all things Braille. In honor of World Sight Day, I've put together a bag of goodies that I'm going to be giving away to one of you guys. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video to find out how you can enter. Full disclosure off the top, this is going to be an opinion piece. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of Braille and what Braille is and the different types of Braille, but then ultimately I'm going to tell you why it's important. Braille came about in 1824 as a need for blind and low vision people to have access to printed materials. At the time, everybody read using raised letters. So they would have embossed printed letters on paper. It took a very long time to read. It was a really inefficient language and it was not very accurate. Louis Braille understood that at the time the military was using a 12-dot system called night writing to communicate between soldiers in complete darkness. He thought that was a brilliant idea, although night writing was too complicated and too tall for somebody to be able to read efficiently. So he developed 6-dot Braille. That's still the same system that we use today. Braille is made up of cells of 6 dots. The top left one being dot 1, going down the left side dot 2, dot 3, and then on the top right, dot 4, underneath that dot 5, and at the bottom dot 6. And every character in Braille is made up of those 6 dots. There are some slight variations using 8-dot Braille, which is the same 6 dots, but they add 2 more at the bottom. And there are some other slight variations depending on where you are in the world, but the most common form is the 6-dot version. Contrary to popular belief, Braille is not a language. Braille is a code, because it is a direct translation of an already existent language. It does not have its own syntax, and it does not have its own grammar. ASL, on the other hand, is a language because it has its own syntax and grammar. Let's talk about the different ways of communicating in Braille. Most recently, Braille has undergone an evolution. For English use, we developed the letter W. Then we adapted a series of contractions or shorthand symbols that mean multiple letters or words in different situations. For example, dots 2, 3, 4, 6 by itself means the word the, or it might be THE in the beginning of a word. The letters A through Z are shown on screen right now. A through J are also numbers 1 through 0. So A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4, and so on. But you need a special symbol called a number indicator at the beginning to tell the reader that that is in fact a number and not just the letter. More recently, in the 80s, Braille developed capitalization and punctuation rules. Those were not always the case. I remember ordering books when I was a kid and getting things that were printed sometime before the 80s that had no periods and no capitals. And oh boy, was that confusing. And more recently, there has been an attempt to unify English Braille because there are so many different codes. There's math Braille called Nemeth. There's scientific Braille, which is a combination of literary and Nemeth. There's music Braille. There's online Braille. And there's been an attempt to try and amalgamate those into one system. Thank goodness. Because let me tell you, learning 5 or 6 different systems of Braille is very confusing. Within that unified English Braille system, there are a couple of grades of Braille. Grade 1 uses none of the shorthand or contractions, and grade 2, or unified, is fully contracted. So it has all of those short form symbols, and the reason for grade 2 Braille or unified English Braille is because it's a lot shorter. Braille is a massive language. When you look at a book, it's huge. This is the contracted version of the Fellowship of the Ring. And let me tell you, my arms are shaking because it is very heavy. It's very difficult to make it more compact than this. And if it was uncontracted, it would probably be 3 or 4 volumes even longer than it is right now. So it's safe to say that Braille is an incredibly bulky language. If you want something that is a huge text with lots of print, you're going to need multiple volumes. Many of my math textbooks growing up, which were this big in print, were 76 or even 100 volumes. Now you may be wondering, can you print Braille on both sides of the paper? The answer is yes, but not typically doing any kind of manual Brailling. You use special machines called embossers, which are essentially Braille printers, and you can print on both sides of the paper. It just slightly offsets the dots, so you don't have dots landing right on top of each other, canceling each other out. So let's talk about how you actually write Braille. Most of the machinery used is many hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. The cheapest form is a slate and stylus. Slate and styluses are probably the most inexpensive way to write Braille. You can pick them up for about $20 on Amazon. The problem is you have to think about putting each character in backwards so it reads the right ways out. Because if you are to mirror a symbol, that AR contraction that I just used would be a GH, and it would turn into complete gibberish. I know many folks who are very quick at writing with a slate and stylus. I personally only use them for really quick notes, or if I need to write something down on the fly and I don't have my phone. There are also Braille label makers, which are just like a lot of printed label makers. You turn it to the correct symbol, you squeeze the handle, and then it pops out one letter at a time. Those you can pick up for about 25 bucks as well. Most blind and visually impaired people that use Braille will use a Perkins Brailler. A Perkins Brailler is like a manual typewriter. It has 6 buttons, one for each of the dots, a space bar, a backspace, and a return key. You roll the paper in manually and you type in each letter manually. There are variations called the Jot-a-Dot, which is a little less expensive. It's about $450. And then there's even more expensive versions like the Mountbatten Brailler that electronically press the Braille through the paper and have a variety of speech and other learning options attached to it. Next, we're going up in price again. Most schools who provide Braille to students will need something called an embosser. We've talked about that briefly. It is a Braille printer. Embossers are incredibly expensive. I own an embosser. You can usually pick up your printer at Staples for 80 bucks. I have to pay at least $3,000 for my embosser. When I got my embosser for university, thankfully I had a tech grant, so I didn't have to pay for it out of pocket. Otherwise, I would never buy an embosser. But it's awesome if you need to put out a lot of text in a short period of time. So how you emboss is you create documents of Braille on your computer. You put it into a special type of software on your computer. There is some free versions like Perky Ducks, and there are some very expensive versions like Braille 2000 or Duxbury, and those are $1,000, $1,200 software that you have to buy. On top of the $3,000 plus you're paying for your embosser. I know there are many industrial embossers that go for $50,000, even $100,000. But usually the more you pay, the faster it's producing the Braille and the more it's intended for industrial or publication purposes. The next way to produce Braille is with something called a refreshable Braille display. What a refreshable Braille display does is it plugs into an electronic device like a computer, and it shows the text that appears on screen in Braille form. Usually, Braille displays work with screen readers or other adaptive software to translate that information from text to Braille. And the reason they're called refreshable is because the text changes. The dots pop up, they go back down, depending on what's on screen. Refreshable Braille displays can also have those 6 dots at the top, and those can operate as a Braille keyboard. Braille displays are usually $1,500 to $3,000, so again, it's not an inexpensive piece of equipment. And finally, the last way to produce Braille is with a Braille note taker. A Braille note taker is like a simplified computer. There are many different versions. Many will run some kind of a pocket PC now. When I was growing up, we used things called Braille lights, and all that it could do is it had a calculator, it would do word processing, it would print, and that was about it. Now, most Braille note takers have a variety of options. So you can connect to the internet, you can check your email, and you don't have to have a screen if you don't want to. Again, those are usually $4,000 or $5,000. So those are all the ways to produce Braille. You're probably thinking, oh my gosh, that is crazy expensive. How can anybody afford that? Why would anybody want to do that? It's such a huge language. It sounds like it's expensive to produce. You need special this, you need special that. Now, let's talk about why Braille is important. I was a late adopter to Braille. I started learning Braille in grade 2. After I had been struggling for the first couple of grades trying to read print. Braille was never intended for me to be a full-time substitution for print reading, but my vision deteriorated fairly significantly by the end of elementary school, and I became a full-time Braille reader. I hated Braille at the beginning. I thought it was horrible. I didn't want to learn it. It was huge. It was heavy. Nobody else in my school was reading it. Why did I have to learn it? I have come 180 degrees from that belief. Braille was my gateway into the mainstream. I could access the exact same information as my peers. I could read independently. I didn't have to wait for help, and it helped me keep up with schoolwork when print was no longer an option. I know many people who still do read print who also use Braille because it helps give their eyes a break. Braille provides that link to learning grammar and syntax and spelling that things like screen readers and audiobooks just don't provide. I've heard horror stories in the community of people who did not understand that there were spaces between words or understand that you put a period at the end of a sentence. It becomes very difficult to get a job if you are not literate. And I know that less than 10% of people who are blind are learning Braille. It is a dying language. Many people who should be given the opportunity to learn a language are not being given that opportunity because of the expense and because there are fewer and fewer people educated in Braille instruction. It can be very expensive to locate a Braille teacher or a TVI, teacher for the visually impaired in your area. Most school boards don't have the budget to be providing Braille education. I know that I was very lucky because I came from a school district that had a lot of surplus income and I was provided with all of the adaptive equipment and Braille instruction that I needed. But I know that in many places around the world, and I am talking first world countries here, people are not being given Braille instruction. They're told that the only option is going to be a screen reader. They can have one or the other, not both. And I believe that to fully integrate and reach your maximum potential, you should be given as many options as possible to understand the world around you. While many people think Braille is cool or it's great that I can read dots with my fingers, for me, it's a lifeline. I may not be the fastest Braille reader, but I use it all over my house for labeling things, for keeping organized, and I can write and keep quick notes for myself without needing anybody's help. I have seen some shocking statistics come out of research done within the blind community showing that people who are Braille literate have a much lower unemployment rate and are able to achieve much higher post-secondary education than people who are not Braille literate. And they show that people who are reading Braille, whether they have remaining vision or not, are able to achieve more. One study out of Washington suggested that 90% of people who are Braille literate were employed versus only 33% who were not. And that's encompassing a huge spectrum of visual abilities. I saw another statistic out of the US that suggested there was only a 33% unemployment rate versus the standard 80% who are under or unemployed within the broader blind community. So if that doesn't speak to the importance of Braille and Braille literacy, I don't know what does. Technology is awesome. Technology gets closer every single day to finding that singularity where people who have disabilities can work on an equal opportunity playing field, but we are not there yet. And I hope that if you see this video and you've been considering learning Braille, whether it's just for fun because you're sighted, or because you're blind or low vision, or because you're the parent of a blind or low vision child, I encourage you to go for it. There is no harm in giving yourself more tools at your disposal, whether you use them or not. Now for the fun. I will be doing my very first giveaway on this channel. I have some Braille themed playing cards, I have a slate and stylus, I have a label maker, and a few other fun things that I'll be tossing into that package. You do not have to be blind or low vision to enter. All you need to do is subscribe to this channel, subscribe to me over on Instagram, the link is on screen and down in the description box, and leave me a comment letting me know that you've done both. I'll be picking the lucky winner on October the 20th, and I'll be contacting them through the DMs on Instagram, so watch out for that there. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it gave you a little more perspective on what Braille is, what Braille does, and why I choose to be a Braille reader. If you want to keep up with me between streams, I have an accessible Twitch stream every Tuesday and Sunday nights at 7:30 Mountain Standard Time, linked in the channel description. I have other social medias linked down below, so there's lots of ways of keeping up with me between posts. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.